I've entitled this sermon today, Resurrected Lord, Then What? And I think it's important that we think about, and last week we were looking at the resurrection. You know, the majority of Christian world was celebrating Easter, which pictures the resurrection, reminds us of the resurrected Lord. But after the Lord is resurrected, then what? What happens? And does it have any effect on our lives? And I started this by referring to the song that Mac chose for our call to our offertory music today, was we're standing in His presence in holy ground. Now, I want us to recognize this very fact. Because there is a resurrected Lord, we are sitting in His presence today in a holy place, because Jesus said, wherever two or three are gathered together, I'll be there with you in the midst. He has that capacity to do that because we do serve a resurrected Lord. He is very, very much alive, and we need to understand that and have an appreciation for that, because it's very easy to dismiss that from our hearts and minds and our thinking because we don't see Him. But think for a moment, let's see, where we want to place Jesus today. Well, we want to place Him up front, but I'd like for Him to be next to you. So let's put Jesus, the resurrected Lord, next to you. I'm not talking about the Jesus who walked the earth, though it's one and the same, but I'm talking about the resurrected Lord, because it makes a difference in the way in which we think. And we talked a little bit about that last week, and how that we see Jesus, how we understand the resurrection and what it tells us about life and about our hopes and about our future. So I wanted to start out off with a question: how is life changed by a resurrected Lord? How is your life changed? How was the early disciples' life changed on that morning when they went there and the tomb was emptied? And how was that change? How did it affect him? And we want to ask also this question, because Matt kind of brought this up after the sermon last week. Had this ever happened before? Because there can be a thought that, well, this has happened before. This is nothing new, in a sense. These kind of things do happen. Now, when I say that, let us be reminded that we live in a world today where people, when I say this has happened before, we live in a world today where many people will attest or say that, one, they have died and come back to life. There was a time their heart stopped and all of that, and they came back to life. Is that a resurrection? Is that what Jesus experienced? Is there a difference in these things? And what understanding does Jesus' resurrection give to His disciples? What is the understanding you have there in that regard? So for a moment, think about, well, let's put on this case. On one side of you sits Jesus, as the disciples knew Jesus. On the other side of you sits the resurrected Lord. So I just want you to be surrounded by this thought. And so now let's take a look, because the question is, resurrected Lord, then what? And we're going to look at when, then what? Because you think, well, then what, that's down the road, that's ways off, we don't need to worry about it. Well, let's start here in John chapter 11, because in John chapter 11, this kind of question is kind of addressed. And we're actually headed towards Colossians chapter 3, kind of the then what. But we need to get a little bit of a background and understanding that what we're talking about is not uncommon. It wasn't uncommon in Jesus' day, and it has not been uncommon from the generations forward. And we can only venture, in part, somewhat of a guess, even what it was like in Old Testament times, because when we think about God and their understanding of God, how they interpreted things, which we recognize that religious leaders got way off track in terms of the way that Jesus saw things and the way that they saw them in His day. But in John chapter 11, verse 21, this is an example now. We're talking about death and we're talking about life after death. This is the example of Lazarus dying. And so his sisters, Lazarus has been dead for 4 days now, and his sisters are talking to Jesus, and they're asking the question about life and death. So verse 21, Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Which, you kind of slipped on this one, Jesus. You could have taken care of this, but you did not. That's kind of, I'm questioning why you allowed all this to happen. And it's also said with a note of finality. As far as Martha is concerned, Lazarus is dead and it's all over and done with, and she's going through all of these emotions. But he says, but I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask, so there's some hope. And Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha had answered, verse 24, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. I know that he will rise again. Now that's important for us all to have the same Martha hope. And that Martha expresses to Jesus. You see, we have this confidence that no matter what the situation, there is coming a time of a resurrection when we will rise again. And that's the hope that we have. And as we go through life and as we get closer to what seems to be inevitable, April 15th, tax time, or we also recognize as we get older that the possibility of our days being a little shorter are quite there. Now, if you're young, you're a teenager, that's forever. It'll never happen to me, and I'll never get wrinkles. Or, I'll never get old and drool or whatever older people do. Never have that, but it does happen. I mean, it's happened to Hollywood movie stars that were gorgeous on screen, and you look at them now, and it's like, oh my. And I'll never get heavier. Yet you look at people as they get older, and that's the same person. Look how they put on weight, and they can't run fast enough to lose it. It keeps following around and attaching itself to them. Anyway, she says, I know my brother rise again. I know that'll happen the last day. And Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. Now, that's Jesus' comment. I am the resurrection and life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies. What are you talking about? He will live even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Here's the interesting thing. I love the way that Martha replies. Martha could have replied, and she did in essence, no, I don't. Because if we just ask that question of all of us, do you really believe this? We probably would say, like Martha, no, I really don't. Because she says to him, yes, Lord, she told him, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who has come into the world. That is not the answer to the question. That is giving her take on who he is, but it doesn't answer this question about living. That they will live. And what he says here, believes in me, will live even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Well, like I say, she responds in a way that doesn't really address the question. And after she had said this, she went back and called her sister and all that. And of course, we know what happens here is that he raises Lazarus from the grave. Now, is this a resurrection? This is the point we want to make.
Feeling the blues today or tired of life already? Do you have questions about life or need spiritual advice? We can help. Log on to worldwidechurchofgod.com or wcgfairfield.blogspot.com and stay connected to reality. The Worldwide Church of God in Fairfield, Santa Rosa, and Modesto are located in the San Francisco Bay Area, regarded as the most prosperous region in the United States. We believe Jesus Christ when he proclaimed in Matthew 6:24 that serving God is more important than serving mammon. We welcome everyone to come and worship and fellowship every Saturday at the times listed on your screen and on our website, worldwidechurchofgod.com.